Good morning, everybody. Welcome once again to this snowy morning here at the office. Today, Alex and I are going to be talking about the issues of nutrition and vitamins, and we'll try and keep it simple. We get questions every day about what to take, how much to take, and why, so we'll kind of break that down today. And the first way we'll break it down is in terms of macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients, of course, are the large nutrients. The micronutrients are the small nutrients. Macronutrients include carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Their primary function is energy production, so they're quite vital. We'll talk about some of the other functions that they have as well as we break them down, starting with carbohydrates. So you probably know carbohydrates as sugars, starches, fiber, grains, that sort of thing, and that's exactly what they are. They're basically broken down into simple sugars, which are the sweets and the sugars, into the very long chain sugars, which are the carbohydrates, the fibers, the starches, and basically the longer the chain of sugars that you put together, the better they are for you. And that's where you're starting to get into the fibers and the starches and the quality grains and those sorts of things. So some of the, as we talked about, some of the better starches are plant-based. Fruits and vegetables are your best sources. Beans, whole grains, if you can tolerate them. Grains can be kind of controversial because of the gluten issue, which is a very real issue. And so some grains are good for some people, other grains are not so good. Oats and things similar to oats that don't contain gluten are wonderful sources of carbohydrates. So we talk about fiber, which is an essential source of your diet. Those are the really long chain carbohydrates. They've got literally hundreds of sugars in them, and you have both soluble and insoluble fibers. One of them functions as a way of staying full, and another one, the insoluble fiber, is functions towards improving your bowel health. But if you want to lose weight, there's many studies that show if you increase your fiber, and preferably your non-bread fiber, so that'd be fruits and vegetables, you have a better chance of losing weight just by increasing your fiber. So, but avoid the simple sugars, the fructose, the sucrose, dextrose, all those OS ones that are very, very bad. If you're looking to lose weight, they're horrible for you. If you're looking to keep your blood pressure down, then avoid the simple sugars, the sweets, the syrups, the additives, those types of things. So those are carbohydrates. Second group, proteins, also have a primary function of energy production, but they also function for muscle development, producing cells are a big portion of cell production, and of course we have trillions of cells, and so protein becomes very important. We also see proteins in enzymes and hormones, which are vital for all of our bodily functions. And so protein is another controversial macronutrient because many people prefer plant-based protein, which is good, but sometimes you can't always get the necessary amounts of protein, especially if you're active, young, athletic. You probably need a good balance of meat-based and plant-based proteins. So plant-based proteins can include things like broccoli, spinach, some of those types of fruits, kidney beans, and then the animal-based proteins include lean meats, so very lean beef, lean chicken, well prepared, and then of course the different types of fish, all good sources of protein. Milk is also a good source of protein, but it's falling out of favor because of our inability to tolerate the enzymes that are in the milk. So I can't quite think of the name of the enzyme now, but anyway, a lot of people are lactose intolerant, and many more people are becoming intolerant of dairy in general. If you have dairy as part of your diet, it is a good source of protein. I'm just not a big fan of having too much dairy in your diet at all. So the most important macronutrient, I believe, and the one that's probably the most understood, is the fat, which is also, its primary function is energy production, but it's also for maintaining warmth, for brain health, cell production, hugely important for immune function and the control of inflammation. So many times you'll see on labels, and we should all be checking labels on our food products, you'll see things like EPA, DHA, ALA. These are all, again, long fats. Fats are comprised of fatty acids, and so short little fatty acids, just like sugars, are not so good for you, but those long fatty acids, again, the DHAs, the EPAs, ALAs are very good sources of fats. We'll break that down a little bit more in a second. One of the most important fats that people should take every day is the alpha omega 3 fatty acid. You also can see alpha 6 fatty acid, alpha 9 fatty acid. The omega portion, if we look at alpha omega fatty acid, don't worry about what the alpha means, but the omega simply means the important chemical is in the third portion of that molecule. So if you see alpha 3, the chemical that we're looking for, the acid chemical, is in the third portion. Alpha 6, you look at the sixth portion. That's why they call it alpha 3, alpha 6, alpha 9. I think the best source of fat is in our oils that we consume, particularly olive oil and canola oil. If people use those in their salads and they use them for cooking, they've really done themselves a big favor, as opposed to what we call hydrogenated oils, margarines and things like that. So also walnut oil and grapeseed oil are really pretty good sources of alpha omega 3 fatty acids. From a food standpoint, one of the most important foods with alpha omega fatty acid are the wild Alaskan salmon. And there's many reports that say in order to control immune system and inflammation, two hugely important concepts, you want to have 3 or 4 sources of salmon per week, or some variation of wild Alaskan salmon. Tuna is probably okay. Let's see, mackerel, those what they call greasy fishes. I'm trying to think of some other ones. Anchovies, none of those are really my favorite, but I think for the American diet, the tuna and salmon in high quality are really great sources of fat. Avocado, great source of quality fat. Marginal to bad sources of fat include red meat, which is really it's an increasingly dangerous food to take in. We'll talk about that in a later class, but the studies nowadays show that there's a marked increase in stomach cancer every year in this country, and it relates to the increase in red meats that we eat here in this country. Good source of protein and fat, but potentially unhealthy in the long run, that being red meats. Avoid things that are called hydrogenated. Hydrogenated simply means that chemists are adding hydrogen to the fat to make it thicker and more manageable. So things like margarine are hydrogenated. Once you hydrogenate a fatty acid, you have a saturated fatty acid. That's another word. And so avoid hydrogenated, saturated, look for the omega fatty acids, look for the non-hydrogenated or the polyunsaturated. Those and the trans are not the trans fats. Trans are another bad one. So read the labels and make sure you understand what those concepts mean. So according to a number of different sources, one of the ones that I recommend the most is the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, which is it's like the RDA but better. So the AMDR talks about the ratio of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and really it's something people get too caught up on, especially when we're looking to lose weight. In general, if you do 50% carbohydrates, 25% fats, and 25% proteins, you're doing really good. If you want to modify that with less carbohydrate, which a lot of diets talk about, good. The most important thing are 2 things. One, to make sure that they're quality fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. So whatever ratio you take doesn't really matter as long as they're of good quality. The second thing is, especially in terms of weight loss, is to simply decrease the total calorie consumption. And so rather than looking at all the different ratios, which can drive people crazy, just make sure you're eating quality carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and watching the amount of calories that you take in. So next video, we'll talk about some of the micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals, and so we'll look forward to talking to you very briefly. Thank you.